Hi, welcome to Cooking from the Past. I'm Deanna from Pisan Academy, and this is our special Thanksgiving episode where we're going to be making a recipe that dates back to the 1600s. This recipe would have been made by the early settlers in America, the Pilgrims, and also would have been made by people in Britain. The one that we are going to make is called a pottage of Indian corn. This recipe uses any bones that you have left over. We have an account of a 1623 recipe that uses mutton bones and then some of the leftover meat. You can use duck, you could use deer like the early settlers did, but today we're going to be using chicken. And in Britain, they didn't have corn, so they would have used oats in their pottage recipes. But because in the New World, they discovered corn, this new crop, this is what we're going to be making, is a pottage of Indian corn, which is again what the Pilgrims would have been eating for that first Thanksgiving, as well as we're going to be using chicken stock, but they probably used duck bones or venison bones or deer bones, whatever they had. This is the recipe book that we're using today. It's called Giving Thanks, Thanksgiving Recipes and History from the Pilgrims to Pumpkin Pie. And it's a great book if you want to use with your family because there are recipes that date in the more modern traditions, some from the 1800s, and then some that date back several hundred years like what we're doing today. So the first thing we need is chicken stock, and you can go this route where you just get a carton. You'll need 6 cups total, but we're going to make homemade chicken stock the way that they would have done when their recipe would have been created. So in order to do that, I've got all of the ingredients here. And so we had a frozen chicken carcass in the freezer from when we had a roasted chicken, so I'm going to throw that in there. We have a whole chicken because pottage is going to take both the bones, but we also want some of the chicken meat. I have about 1 cup of carrots and celery, each rough cut, about 1.5 cups of rough cut onions, some thyme and a bay leaf, some cloves of garlic, and peppercorns. And we're going to throw all of this in a pot and then just cover it with water and let it cook for about 3 hours. Okay, so I've got my soup pot, so let's put all of our ingredients in there. I'll start by putting in the whole chicken and then the chicken carcass. And then we'll just spread the veggies on top of that. And again, this is mainly for the stock, but we're also going to be using some of the ingredients as well. Okay, so we've got our pot on the stove, and we need to just cover this up enough to put water over everything, and then we're going to let this cook for about 3 hours to make our chicken stock. Okay, so we're going to bring this to a boil, and once it boils, we're going to reduce it to a simmer, and we're going to let it simmer down for about 3 hours. Our goal is to get 6 cups of chicken stock. Okay, so our chicken stock is just about done, and while that's finishing up, you can go ahead and prep the rest of the ingredients for the pottage. You're going to need 4 cups of leafy greens. This can be spinach or chard. I used red kale. 1 cup of chopped onion, 1/4 cup of chopped parsley, and then some minced herbs, and you'll use sage and marjoram and thyme. You're also going to need coarse ground grits. Now these grits are not the same southern style grits that are finely ground. You need to find either stone cut or coarse ground grits. And for me, it was a little difficult to source. I ended up finding them on Amazon, and there's a company in Kentucky that creates these coarser ground grits. So I just ordered them, had them delivered to my door. You need 2 cups, so there was plenty in the package that I bought. Okay, so our chicken broth is done and it looks pretty good. So we're going to transfer it over to the island and start the process of separating the chicken from the broth. I've got 2 bowls prepped, one to put the meat in and with the bones, and then once I take the meat off to put the meat separated from the bones. So it should fall apart pretty easily like what you're seeing here. And you'll just transfer everything over to the bowl. And then we're also going to strain this, so don't worry about getting every last bit, but you do want to try to get the chicken so you can separate the meat from the bone. Okay, so I've got the meat separated from the bone from the chicken, and we're going to chop that up when it cools down just a little bit. And I have a strainer over a pot here, and we're going to strain the bone broth, and then I'm going to put it back in this pot to cook our pottage. And while you're straining, you may have to stop and kind of get a spoon. It just depends on how much, if stuff is able to strain, but the broth is going through pretty well. So the rest of this you will just discard, and in Seattle we compost, so we'll throw it in our compost. Okay, so I'm going to take our strained broth that is now ready to go, and I'm going to pour it back in the pot. It should be 6 cups. So I'm going to just coarsely chop this chicken that came from the soup base that we just made, our chicken stock. And then our broth is on the stove, and I'm going to add this chicken to it. Okay, so we'll just put that in, and we're actually going to add all of our ingredients now. So we're going to get this up to a boil, and as soon as this is boiling, we're going to add all of our other ingredients. And this kind of meal, we're using a gas stove here, but obviously they would have been cooking it over a fire or over like a fireplace within a kitchen. And so we do have some modern conveniences, but we're trying to be as true to the recipe as we can. And again, this meal was a way for them to use all sorts of parts of the animal, or if they had boiled the meat, which was very popular, boiling, not grilling like we do in the modern day. It was a way for them to use the bones and make a stock, and then any of the meat that would have been left over, they could have added, like what we've done with our chicken here. They would have used lamb, mutton, they would have used deer. In the New World, there were ducks and there was deer, and so we know that they would have been using those animals. We've seen them in the archaeological record as well. So in making our recipe, we went to Whole Foods, and that's where we got the roast chicken, which is the carcass that I had frozen. We went to Costco, which is where I got the whole chicken. And so our ingredients are a little easier to source, except, you know, the grits I did have to order a few days in advance, so there was some planning involved there to wait till them arrive. But back in the day, they would have hunted all of these animals, particularly in the New World. And the oats, now in the 1600s, they would have had merchants that they could have gone to and sourced some of the materials, but it would have been all these individual shops. It wouldn't have been one-stop shopping like what we have in the modern world. So our pot has come to a boil, so I'm going to reduce the heat, and I'm going to stir in our 2 cups of grits. The parsley, onions, and then our herbs. There's the marjoram, the sage, and the thyme. And this is sort of like what we would call a one-pot meal, and this would be basically, particularly for the poor, it would be the entire meal. You would have some pottage and maybe a little bit of bread. Go ahead and stir in your chopped greens as well, and then add a little bit of salt and pepper. So there's just some pepper to taste, not too much. And then we'll add a little bit of salt. So when you're at this stage, you want to stir this frequently to make sure that the grits don't stick to the bottom of the pan. And you're going to keep it on a simmer, on a low heat for about 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, you will cover the pot, take it off of the heat, and you're going to let it set for about an hour until the grits get soft. And then it's ready to serve. So our pottage has been cooking for a while, and you can determine if you want it soupier. You would, use more chicken stock, maybe cook it a little bit less, but you just want to make sure that the grits are tender. Or if you want it to be a little more like a porridge or an oatmeal consistency, you can reduce the stock a little bit, and you can, or increase the amount of grits that you're using, and you can let it cook a little bit longer. So let's go ahead and sample our pottage. So we're just going to scoop a little bit in a dish, and then we can try it. So you can see that the grits have expanded a little bit. I like it a little soupy, so we are going to try it now. That is really good. The corn is really good. I would like a little more salt and pepper on it, so I would probably add that at the table. But it's got a really good flavor, a really nice chicken stock flavor. Now what we did took quite a bit of time because we made our homemade chicken stock. If you got the carton at the store, you would just need 6 cups of the chicken stock. You could also use beef stock, and you could use some cut up pieces of beef. If you wanted to use lamb, you could also use beef stock. You could use turkey stock if you have leftover carcass and you want to make this next week after Thanksgiving. So there's a lot of ways that you can do this. And again, this was just a very common meal for poor people, but also for rich people, and it's kind of this one pot really nice meal. You've got your greens, you've got a little bit of grains, and your meat. So in the book that I took this recipe from, the Giving Thanks book, there is a recipe from 1623 that talks about pottage, and it talks about using mutton. So again, we'll put a link to the book that we have that we used here today in the description below. So if you're using the store-bought chicken stock, this is a great recipe, pretty easy to put together, and it's a great way to bring kids in and talk about history, talk about the types of foods that they ate in the past. And that's what we're trying to do here at Cooking with the Past at Pisan Academy. We're trying to engage people with history and having fun in the kitchen with some of these classic recipes from the past. Thanks for joining us for this episode. If you subscribe to our channel, you'll get our morning coffee videos, but you'll also get our December Cooking from the Past, where we're going to create some Victorian recipes that relate to Christmas time. So we'll see you next time, and have a great Thanksgiving.